Welcome everybody to Pastoral and Spiritual Care in Ageing and Palliative Care. My name's Christopher Turner and I'm your lecturer for this semester. It's great to be with you. I'm looking forward to learning with all of you online this semester. I encourage you to open the handbook that corresponds with your level of enrolment. The handbook will be where you found this video in the same tile, so you're in the right place. Read thoroughly through the handbook so you can get a grasp of how we're going to approach this semester, how we're going to approach the assessment tasks, and how the spirit in which we will engage in conversation together. And as you read that, make any notes. If you have any questions or clarifications, please don't hesitate to message me through ARC or email me directly. My email address is in the handbook. So there you go. It's good to be together with you. This is one of my favourite units. It is a subject matter that of course relates to all of us in our own living and in the living of those that we love around us. It is something that's part of our common humanity. So it naturally concerns all of us in so many ways, and the nature of the way we care for one another through the process of ageing is at the heart of our understanding of pastoral and spiritual care. I'm absolutely sure that there will be a great diversity of people in our class, diversity of life experience, diversity of theological perspective, diversity of understandings about what care is and what pastoral care in particular is, and all of those diverse perspectives are of course welcome and encouraged in our class discussion. So when you turn up with your views, your opinions, your experiences, and your capacity to ask critical questions. And all of that will be welcome in our classroom. I want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as the custodians of the land on which Stirling Theological College is situated, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and honour deeply their religious and spiritual traditions that have nurtured this place and the communities that have lived in it for so many years. Also the Kurnai people, who are the custodians of the land in which I live in West Gippsland, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present also. I do encourage you to engage in this unit and its discussion in the spirit of critical questioning, critical research, but critical research done in the spirit of love and attentiveness to one another, listening deeply to one another, which of course is one of the central characteristics of pastoral and spiritual care. I thought I'd just, by way of getting us going, in a sense inspiring, hopefully, a sense of real interest in where this unit will take us as those who are forming ourselves for pastoral and spiritual care. So I'm going to spend a few minutes just, I suppose, giving you an example of the basis on which we're going to proceed. And of course, one of the primary questions that we'll ask is, what is ageing? A good place to start, I guess. What is ageing and what is death? How do those things form part of our sense of spirit and spirituality? And indeed, for those of us who are part of a religious tradition, how do these experiences form our understanding of our faith and our theology? Well, I'm going to start off by suggesting something very, very simple, and it's something that is characteristic of all life, not just what we would say is old life. And I'm going to say that ageing is the process of change. And you can perhaps immediately hear from that that change is part of our entire experience of organic life, from conception to death and decay. And so I think it's probably right to say that ageing is an experience, a human experience that characterises life itself from its beginning to its end. And all of these processes of change that characterise living, organic living, can be understood in many ways, as Antonio Damasio invites us to understand them, through what we know is the process of homeostatic regulation, the capacity of any living organism to change itself and to change its environment in order to maintain and sustain the conditions that are necessary for it and its species to stay alive. Homeostatic regulation. And I would suggest to you that our understanding of spirit is inseparable from our understanding of organic life as homeostatic life. Organisms that have an intrinsic capacity to use their own power to change themselves and to change their environments in order to sustain life. And this is not only sustain individual life, my life as it were, but also the life of my species, which immediately begs the question of relational or social homeostasis as part of that picture. But essentially, ageing is change. So ageing is living. It's being alive as an individual organism and experiencing all of the changes that are part of that process of being alive. And it's being alive as a social organism, as a single organism who is part of a species, who shares in the collective interest, you might say, or as Schweitzer said, will, to live, to be alive, and to sustain the conditions necessary for the species to be alive. And this is why Schweitzer, Albert Schweitzer, who you will get to know throughout the, at least you'll get to know his work throughout the unit, was able to say that spirit is the will to live amongst other wills to live. So both the individual aspect of homeostasis, the capacity to keep my own organic life thriving and sustained, but also my awareness that that is occurring in a social context, in amongst other organic processes that are changing their environments and themselves in order to stay alive. We can see this homeostasis, this spirituality, I will call it, of living organisms in both the will to live, but also in the capacity, or we might say the power, to die. And that might seem strange for me to suggest that there is a power in changing in a way that is characterised by decline and decay and limit and ultimately death. But you know, we know that organisms that do not readily die, but will continue to grow and expand exponentially and theoretically, I guess, eternally, will ultimately kill the environment within which they live. For example, cancerous cells, certain types of virus are very, very good at completely overtaking their environment in the pursuit of their own will to live, and they will ultimately destroy their environment and thus themselves. So the capacity to die, the capacity for being able to limit oneself or to succumb to limit in order that other organisms might come into being, live and thrive, is in fact an extraordinary spiritual power, a power that characterises living organisms, and it is part of the will to live amongst other wills to live. So I think what you perhaps can hear is that I'm suggesting that ageing, the process of change, living in that process of change, and dying in that process of change are all elements of powerful organic spirit. They're part of who we are and what we are, and so worthy of our attention. So ageing, on this understanding, is not to be feared, though we do fear it often because of what it means, largely because of what it means socially and because we have an intrinsic will to live. Ageing is not to be seen as something that is alien to us or foreign to what it means to being human, though often we respond to ageing and the aged as something to be treated as if it were a disease. The new research coming from the field of computational biology indicates that ageing can be seen as a form of disease or a collection of diseases in response to certain changes that are taking place in the human organism, and therefore we ought to be researching ways to prevent it and to cure it. And so computational biology is one of these emerging fields that we'll refer to from time to time in order to build our awareness into the way human beings and science is progressing in terms of what ageing means, what value we place in it, and whether or not it really belongs in the field of health and disease prevention. The book, if you want to read about that kind of question right from the get-go, Andrew Steele, a computational biologist, has just published a book called Ageless: The New Science of Getting Older Without Getting Old. Sounds like I haven't read it. I've listened to Andrew be interviewed. Sounds like a fascinating read, and I fully intend to read it and would recommend it to you as some of the latest research. So that kind of approach to ageing will ultimately medicalise the ageing process. And one of the questions we would ask as pastoral and spiritual carers is, does the process of ageing, or can the process of ageing and dying be reduced to the medical understanding of human life? I mean, it is certain from our experience that disease often, though not always, accompanies the later times of the ageing process. Yet ageing is not synonymous with disease. Every aspect of ageing, like every aspect of human living, is rich with potential meaning and creativity. Ageing, then, is about change over time. It is the natural growth, flourishing, and eventual ending of a living organism that is evident in the physiological, social, creative change that occurs through the passing of time. Change related to vital adaptability and creativity is often welcome, isn't it, in our experience, as you can imagine. Change that is related to decline, limit, and death is less welcome. Yet at a social level, the change of decline and death is as important as that of growth and creativity. Just as a synaptic connection in the brain may explode into nothingness in order to make way for a new synaptic connection to be formed, so the individual human person will decline and end in order for new individual expressions of human life to grow, adapt, and create. And this is a really, really important perspective to take in our research, particularly when we are asking questions of whether or not to medicalise ageing to the point that science is taking us. I think this analogy from the field of neuroscience, the synaptic analogy, is helpful for us as we try to understand the necessity for change as a basis for organic life. Neuroplasticity and epigenetics are organic processes that lie at the heart of spirituality and the organic capacity to be alive and find and make meaning in life and in dying. You know, neuroplasticity, very simplistically of course, is the brain's capacity to form new synaptic connections in response to internal and external environmental stimuli. This is how we learn and grow, but it's also part of the process of limit and decline. Epigenesis is the way in which an embryonic cell is able to grow into a complex, multicellular living organism without an overarching blueprint or plan. The behaviour of the cell itself, in interaction with its environment, gives rise to an organism that, though built on a genetic foundation, is inherently changeable. And epigenetics is the study of the impact of the external environment on the behaviour of that genetic material. There are various different opinions about just how much impact epigenetics has, and how much our environments are able to fundamentally change the way we grow as organisms. But most scientists will acknowledge that it has some impact. Genes express themselves differently under the impact of the environment, but do not change their structure. These biological observations have an impact on the way we think about ourselves as spiritual beings who seek meaning in the midst of the change that takes place in ourselves and our environment, and how that impacts our bodies and therefore our sense of meaning. So when we talk about spirituality and spiritual care in relation to this dynamic process of change and growth and limit and decline, what are we talking about? Well, as I said to you earlier, Albert Schweitzer, the great philosopher, physician, theologian, called the will to live the first preconscious spiritual act of the evolving organism. He understood the spiritual act to be built on the physiology of all living organisms. In human beings, it finds its fullest expression in our pursuit of meaning and relationship in the world. The will to live is rooted in the physiological processes of homeostatic regulation. To be an organism that has the capacity to change in order to sustain the conditions necessary for the life of itself and of its species, is to be a spiritual reality. Remembering that spirit, in the Latin, means breath, and ruach in the Hebrew, the spirit of God. Ruach, as you can hear, means breath or wind. So we're talking about life when we speak about spirit. Spiritual care, in the terms that I've been talking about, is a form of social pursuit of homeostasis, of change in pursuit of life. And it is this through the embrace of change and relationship as meaningful. It is rooted not in the therapeutic desire for healing. So in that sense, it has a difference to the computational biological approach already. But in the more deeply organic desire for meaning and relationship in whatever circumstance we find ourselves, in the fullness of living and creative growth, or in the decline and limit of the approach of death. Spirituality in this sense is rooted in the actual situation of the organism, not in a teleological idea, whether that be phenomenological, for example, the explanation of phenomena on the basis of their purpose, or theological, the explanation of the material world as that which is designed with a purpose. Spiritual care pays radical attention to the unfolding of change and living in the situation, in the moment, and to the experience of those living organisms, those people, those common humans, those humans we have so much in common with in every moment of every day. As such, even when we are succumbing to death, our whole selves as organic, deeply aware of our social dimension, seeks meaning and creative participation beyond myself, beyond ourselves. In this sense, as a spiritual being, I can see past my individual existence and into the future of the whole of life, both the life of my own species and the life of the environment that sustains my species, which is beyond me. As such, when we talk about spiritual care and ageing, we'll find ourselves talking about the shared pursuit of meaning that may include the meaning of physical changes, sexuality, relationships, earth and nature, life experience, the getting and the loss of wisdom, dementia and Alzheimer's, the approach to death and the many small deaths that occur along the way, cultural approaches to ageing, migration and ageing. So you can hear the deeply contextual or situational element of what it means to listen to another with pastoral and spiritual care. When we spiritually care for one another, we do not attempt to help each other escape the reality of living and dying, of ageing. We do not fall into the trap of what Kenneth Leach calls pathological religion, which fails us by seeking ways to help us escape from being human. No, spiritual care establishes our common humanity. Spiritual care is essentially about establishing mutual and common humanity through the attention of deep listening to what is happening now and extending the invitation to another person to discover their own spiritual resources, their own homeostatic power, as it were, and to construct their own sense of meaning, hope, and relationship in the world, and thus investing each person we listen to with the full dignity of their spiritual humanity. This is why I love this unit so much. It is so intrinsically human. And this is why I love the Jesus of the Gospels so much. Because so much of what he says and what he does in the stories that we have of him and those around him, to me, is full of this vital spirituality, the will to bring abundant life to oneself and to one's environment, to one's relationships with others in the world. So I hope that in that short taster, you will have got a sense of my enthusiasm, and hopefully my enthusiasm is infectious, and you will catch some of it and come to class full of questions and wonderings, full of your own experience and what you want to learn from that, and full of the desire to research carefully and critically our understandings of spirit, spirituality, pastoral and spiritual care, and the way we engage with others in the world around us. I look forward to seeing you online soon.